It's been nearly 1 week since the Springboks played the All Blacks in round 2 of the Rugby Championship this year in Auckland, New Zealand. There's been a little bit of time for the dust to settle, and in this video I'm going to share my views and opinions about what's next for the Springboks. Hola, buenos dias, and welcome to Mexico. This is Inside Rugby and my name is Mark. In this video we're going to go on a little walk and I'm going to talk about the Springboks and what's next for them. We're a week away from their last game in this year's 2023 Rugby Championship, which is going to be against Argentina in Johannesburg. And I'm going to talk about some of the things that I've read, heard, and I'm thinking about what's next for the Springboks. So let's get into that in this video. First off, a big hello to all my South African audience. It's great to have your support and welcome you back to my channel. Remember, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, I'm going to be covering all of the remainder of the Rugby Championship, the warm-up games to the World Cup, and all of the World Cup right here on Inside Rugby. So hit that little subscribe button. Now, I've been reading a lot over the last week about what happened in that South African game from a South African perspective, and it's been pretty interesting from a Kiwi perspective to read and to listen to all this stuff. So I thought I'd make this video and just talk about my perspective on some of that and share what I think is going to happen as we move forward closer to the Rugby World Cup. And I think that's where I want to start, because it's pretty obvious that come the end of October, no one's going to be worried about what happened in the Rugby Championship. I think it's all about what's happening on October the 28th, the final game in that Rugby World Cup, and who is able to lift that trophy. And you know, as Kiwis and South Africans, we get very passionate about our rugby. We get very passionate about our rugby coaches, the selections of teams, and sometimes we lose, I guess, a little bit of focus on the big picture. And in this case, this year, the big picture is the Rugby World Cup. So everything's tending to lean towards that. So if we look at the game last week in Auckland, there were some interesting aspects for that, both from a Kiwi and a Springboks point of view, but I want to focus on this video on the Springboks side of things. So for me, that game in Auckland had two distinct phases. It was the first 20 minutes, which was dominated by the All Blacks, and South Africa really couldn't get themselves into the game. And for me, that didn't set the pattern of the game. It just gave the All Blacks that dominance in that first period of play. But if we look at the second phase of that game, which I call the remaining 60 minutes of the game, we'll see that not only did Springboks win on the scoreboard, they started to impress themselves and dominate in other areas of the field as well. So 17 points to 15 in the remainder of the game after the first 20 minutes to the Springboks, and it was the second week in a row that the All Blacks had lost the second half. So I think the Springboks did a great job at culling the tide of the All Blacks dominance. They did get back into the game. Their bench did make a difference, and we absolutely did see the potential of the Springboks, particularly after we saw that dominating display from them against the Wallabies. So all is not lost, and I think that it was a matter of, and this has been spoken a lot about in the last week, is that 20 minutes from the All Blacks was just something phenomenal, and it doesn't happen every game, that's for sure. Now, of course, the Springboks for that game in Auckland, they brought in those 10 players that were sent ahead of the party, and obviously the combination was different than it was in the first game against the Wallabies. Jacques Nienaber has talked about getting the balance right in the Springboks team, and every time I've listened to him talking in press conferences and about the selection criteria for the Springboks, like most of the other coaches and selection panel, they're working through a process to find the right combinations to play in the right team. In his recent press conference yesterday, he talked about how the Springboks are aiming to get the right combination to play against the right opponents in the Rugby World Cup. So selecting the right team that they think is going to do the job against the opponents that they have in front of them in that game. Now we all know that Pool B in the Rugby World Cup is going to be a tough one. South Africa comes up against Ireland and Scotland, and I guess the toughest game is going to be against Scotland, not Ireland, because that Scotland game could be the knockout game for South Africa. So I have no doubts that the Springboks are going to do okay and get through into the knockout phase. But it's interesting to hear their strategy when it comes to selecting a team that's going to be good enough to play against the opponents on that particular day. And that's what Ninaba uses the word balance a lot and talks about getting the balance of the team right. And I guess in some key positions there's a lot of selection ideas going on, because, you know, first of all you've got 4 fly halves in the Springboks to choose from, and Pollard is back into the training group. They're hoping to have him ready for the warm-up games if he's able to meet all of his rehab markers as he moves forward. Now if he has any setbacks, that might be delayed, of course. So Mani Lebok's doing really well. Damien Willemse is a fantastic player. I really like that guy. So I don't think the Springboks have got any issues in those, in the number 10 shirt as far as selection goes. But looking across the field, again, Ninaba said about the players that have been playing in Japan. They came back from Japan in around about April, and they haven't played rugby since then. So a lot of them are still getting integrated back into the system. Some of the other players, of course, have had that opportunity to play against Australia and New Zealand, so they're battle hardened and they've had that taste of international rugby again this year, which is obviously important. He did give away in the press conference that it's going to be extremely difficult now for any Springbok player outside of the existing group to get into the group, unless there is an injury or something that brings them in. And it sounds to me as though the Springbok group as it stands today is pretty settled, and the World Cup squad is going to be selected from that. So if there's any players on the fringes at the moment, it doesn't look like there's going to be an opportunity. But you know, Ninaba, like most of the other coaches, are saying at the moment that things are still open, and there's potentially time for anybody to show their hand. And I think that's a smart thing, because, you know, we've got one more round in the Rugby Championship to go. It's going to be interesting to see what Springbok team is selected for their game against Argentina. Argentina are going to definitely bring it to the Springboks. They had this dramatic win over Australia in the last minute of that game in round 2 of the Rugby Championship. And I think they're going to be very void to come to South Africa and to really put it up to the Springboks. So I don't think the Springboks can, and I don't think they will be complacent in this game against Argentina. And it's going to be interesting to see what selection they put out onto the field for that game. So what next for the Springboks? Well, there's definitely no need to panic. I think it's a case of they are the world champions already. They know how to do it in the Rugby World Cup, and there's no doubt that they're going to go into this year's tournament as one of the strongest favourite teams of the competition. I think, like a lot of coaches are saying, that it's a nice thing to have momentum, to have wins as you go into the Rugby World Cup, but it's more important to understand what your right combinations are, get those players playing well, give them that battle hardened experience during these warm-up matches, and also not getting too many people injured. And I think as we get to the last stages of the Rugby Championship, the Springboks are also going to be thinking about that. So I do suspect that we're going to see a couple of changes in the Springboks against Argentina. I think that the second half of that game, if Springboks are able to dominate the first half, is going to be an opportunity for some players to get a run. And I think Ninaba is going to do that against the Argentinian team. So yeah, I don't think the All Black game was such a bad thing for the Springboks. Quality side, quality players, They know what they're doing, and I think we're going to see against Argentina next week. Back home in South Africa, I think we're going to see the strong South African performance again. That's going to set them up well to head off to Europe to play the warm-up games and then get into the first rounds of the World Cup. So we're around about 50 days away now from the start of the World Cup. It's getting very exciting, and we've got that last round of the Rugby Championship to go. So let me know what your thoughts are. If you're from South Africa and you're watching this video, let me know what you think. Now that we've had some time to think about that Springboks All Black game a little bit more, in the context that, you know, yes, New Zealand were dominant in that first 20 minutes, but after that the Springboks more than held their own, and on the scoreboard, which, you know, tends to matter at the end of the game, they were better than the All Blacks were. So, you know, that's another thing that Ninaba alluded to in the press conference yesterday, is that sometimes you win games when you don't really deserve or expect to, and other times you don't win games when you play better than the opposition. So something to bear in mind as we go into the World Cup. A win is a win, that's for sure. Buenos dias, ladies.
Buenos dias.
And a win is a win in the Rugby World Cup. It doesn't matter how you get it. We've seen it over very many different games in the World Cup from past games. And at the end of the day, October the 28th, who stands up with that Rugby World Cup trophy, William Webb Ellis Trophy? That's what counts. So I think the Springboks are going to be there or thereabouts when it comes to the end of the Rugby World Cup. So really interested in your views. Drop me a comment, tell me what you think. What do you think the selections are going to be like for the Argentina game for the Springboks? Do you think that we're going to see a few new starters in the Springbok lineup? Do you think that the coaching team's going to wait until the second half to bring on some new players and give them the opportunity? Or is this going to be a game where we see the Springboks putting out again a strong team to allow them to get those combinations working, get some high levels of motivation going, and give them momentum as they go into that warm-up game and then into the Rugby World Cup itself? Really interested to hear your views on that one. Now I'm going to be doing a preview of the game against Argentina in South Africa right here on this channel, so if you don't want to miss that, hit the subscribe button and the little bell notification. You'll be notified when I drop that video. We're also going to be having a closer look at the All Blacks and the Wallabies over the next week and dissecting that a little bit more. Got some views on the All Blacks about how I don't think they're the finished product yet and there's still work to do. And what next for the Wallabies? That's also a good question that we should be asking as we head into the final round of the Rugby Championship. A lot of pressure going on Eddie Jones and the boys from down under as they get more prepared for the Rugby World Cup. So plenty coming up on Inside Rugby here with Mark Philpott. Be sure to follow along. Okay folks, that's it for this particular video. What are your thoughts about where Springboks are at the moment, what they need to do to maintain their momentum going forward? And I'll see you all again soon in another video right here on Inside Rugby. Until then, stay safe, stay well, and enjoy your rugby. Bye for now.